Today we're going to be taking a deep dive, into a really interesting postcard.
Oh, fun!
Yeah, and you know what makes this particular postcard so interesting is we think there's a love story maybe hidden in it.
A love story, huh? I like it.
Yeah.
Well, as someone who studies deltiology, which is the study of postcards,
Right.
I have to say that this one really jumped out at me when I saw it.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, I mean, just look at this postcard. The front is so visually rich.
Yeah, it really is.
You've got this charming street scene, Lockhart Street in Sayre, Pennsylvania from 1906.
It's like stepping back in time.
Oh, yeah.
You've got the trolley car going down the middle of the street, all these businesses, the old-timey awnings. There are even these blurry figures of people walking around like they're, frozen in time.
No, it's amazing.
The message is addressed to a Miss Ruby Sims, and it says, "We'll be home by next Wednesday. Write me at Russell to Busser, Middletown, when I can see you. Hope to see you well and looking your prettiest." And it's signed, Joe.
Joe. Now, who is Joe? And what's his relationship with Ruby? Is this a love letter? A friendly note? We need to get to the bottom of this.
Okay, let's break it down.
Okay.
The message, it definitely has an affectionate tone, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
But, like you were saying, social customs were different back then. I mean, what we might consider a little bit, overly flirty today could have been totally normal between close friends or even family in 1906.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So maybe Joe wasn't head over heels for Ruby, but he clearly cared about her.
Absolutely. And think about it. He went out of his way to give her an address where she could write back to him. It's not just a casual see you when I see you kind of thing. This is write me here. I want to hear from you.
That's true. And it makes you wonder what was so important that it took him away from Sayre in the first place.
Yeah, good point. He was in Middletown for who knows how long. We know it must have been at least a week.
Right, at least. Maybe longer.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Was he there for work, family? Was he like a traveling salesman going from town to town?
All good possibilities. Did their paths cross again? Did they stay in touch? So many questions.
I know, right? And then there's the whole question of what life was even like back in 1906.
Yeah.
It was a time of huge change, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Cities were booming. New technology was popping up everywhere.
Yeah, and yet, in a small town like Sayre, things probably moved at a bit of a slower pace. Like you see that trolley car in the postcard.
Right.
Yeah, it's a symbol of progress. But it also reminds us that getting around back then wasn't nearly as easy as it is today.
It's true. Imagine trying to plan a date around a trolley schedule. Talk about a logistical nightmare.
I know. And then there's communication, or the lack thereof. No smartphones, no instant messaging. Joe and Ruby were relying on the postal service, which, let's face it, wasn't exactly known for its speed or reliability back then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even a simple letter could take days or even weeks to arrive. And postcards, well, they were even more vulnerable to getting lost or delayed.
So their entire reunion, this potential love story, hinged on the postal service.
That's kind of crazy when you think about it.
It is. And it just adds to the drama of their story. Did Ruby get Joe's message in time? Did she write back? Did fate or the postal service conspire to keep them apart? Oh, the suspense is killing me. But before we jump ahead, I think it's important to dig a little deeper into what we actually know about their relationship so far.
Okay, good idea.
We've talked about the tone of the message, but what are the real possibilities here? Was this a grand romance or something else entirely?
Well, it's tempting to jump to conclusions and see this as a classic love story. Joe, the dashing traveler, pining for his sweetheart back home. Ruby, eagerly awaiting his return. It's a romantic image for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's like something out of a movie. But like we said, we have to be careful about imposing our modern day interpretations on the past.
Right.
And even if they weren't lovers, their connection was clearly important to them. Maybe they were close friends or cousins or something like that.
Yeah.
And in a time when people are so often separated by distance, those kinds of bonds were even more precious.
You're so right. And we can't forget that societal norms were different back then. What might seem like a flirtatious remark to us could have just been a standard way of expressing affection between friends or family.
So we have this tantalizing blend of romance, longing, mystery, and maybe even a bit of family drama thrown in for good measure.
It's a recipe for a great story, that's for sure. And it all starts with this one little postcard.
Okay, well, now I'm really hooked. What else can we uncover about this intriguing piece of history?
Well, I think the next step is to zoom in on Lockhart Street itself. That street scene might hold more clues than we realize.
Let's do it. I'm ready to put on my detective hat and see what secrets we can uncover. All right, so let's zoom in on Lockhart Street and really dissect this scene.
Okay, yeah. Let's take a closer look and try to picture ourselves there, Back in 1906.
Okay, so what are the things that immediately pop out at you? What details do you notice?
Well, first off, I mean, those buildings are just beautiful. All those ornate details, the intricate facades.
Yeah, it's very Victorian, isn't it? Very grand.
Yeah, definitely. Late Victorian era. And you see those awnings, those charming little awnings.
Yeah.
Those were super common back then. They provided shade for shoppers and pedestrians.
Right. It's time
Yeah.
before air conditioning.
Yep.
You needed those awnings to keep cool.
Exactly. And it's not just about the buildings. Look at that trolley car running right down the middle of the street.
Yeah, that's cool. It really highlights how things were changing, even in smaller towns like Sayre. They were becoming part of this bigger network, this web of transportation.
Oh, absolutely. And, that connectivity, that ability to travel more easily had a huge impact on relationships too.
Oh, how so?
Well, just imagine how much harder it would have been for Joe and Ruby to stay in touch if they'd lived in a time before trains and trolley cars.
Wow, that's true. Like their whole story could have been completely different.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it makes you appreciate their connection even more, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like they were willing to put in the effort to overcome those distances and communication barriers to stay in touch.
Totally. I mean, even just sending a letter back then was a commitment.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And remember how Joe told Ruby to write him at Russell to Busser, Middletown? That's not something you'd just tell anyone,
Right. It suggests a level of trust, a shared understanding of how they communicate.
Exactly. Like a little secret code almost. And it makes you wonder, what was their communication like before Joe went to Middletown? Were they writing letters regularly? Did they see each other often?
I don't know, but now I'm picturing Ruby, waiting for the mailman every day, hoping for a letter from Joe.
Oh, I can totally see that. And then getting that postcard, a physical object that he touched with his handwriting on it.
That's so romantic.
Yeah, it is. It's like a tangible piece of him,
Absolutely. And it's funny to think that back then, getting a postcard wasn't exactly a private thing.
Right.
I mean, people would often read each other's mail, right? So Ruby's family, her neighbors, they probably all knew about Joe and his message.
Oh, yeah, totally. Postcards were practically public announcements back then.
That's crazy. So their relationship, whatever it was kind of playing out on this public stage.
It was. And, that's really important to remember when we're trying to understand their story. Their community, the people around them, would have had a huge influence on their lives.
Right. Like social circles were smaller, gossip traveled fast, and your reputation was everything.
Oh, absolutely. So if Joe and Ruby were, more than just friends, they might have felt pressure to keep things under wraps.
Ooh, a secret romance. Forbidden love. Okay, now this is getting interesting.
Right. But let's not get too carried away here. We still have to consider the possibility that their relationship was purely platonic.
Okay, yeah, true.
Even if they weren't lovers, their connection was clearly meaningful. Friendship and family ties were super important back then.
Yeah, especially in small towns like Sayre.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maintaining those bonds often took a lot of effort, especially when distance was involved.
So maybe this postcard wasn't a love letter, but it was still a really important way for them to stay connected.
It's a reminder that human connection comes in many forms.
That's true. And whether they were lovers, friends, or family, their story speaks to this universal human need. The need to connect, to belong, to share our lives with others.
Absolutely. And that need transcends time and culture. It's something we all experience.
Okay, well, we've been focusing a lot on the social dynamics and the possible nature of their relationship. But what about Joe and Ruby as individuals? What can we glean about their personalities from this postcard?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we can gather clues from their names, their addresses, even the tone of the message.
Right.
But ultimately, their inner lives remain a mystery.
It's frustrating, but also kind of fascinating, isn't it? Like we're getting these glimpses into their lives, but we'll never know the whole story.
It is, and that's part of what makes deltiology so captivating. It's like solving a puzzle where you'll never have all the pieces.
Okay, well, let's play a little game then. If you could ask Joe or Ruby one question, what would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think I'd ask Joe what made him choose this particular postcard. Was it the image of Lockhart Street? Did it remind him of something specific?
Oh, good question. I'd ask Ruby how she felt when she received the postcard. Did it make her happy? Did it make her miss Joe even more?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, we'll never know the answers, but just asking those questions helps us connect with them on a deeper level.
It reminds us that they were real people with real emotions, living their lives in a world that, while different from ours, wasn't so different after all.
Exactly. And that's the magic of history, right? It allows us to step outside our own time and place and connect with the human experience across centuries.
Okay, well, let's zoom out a little bit and think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
1906 was a time of massive social and political upheaval, wasn't it? How might those larger forces have shaped Joe and Ruby's lives?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Industrial Revolution was transforming America, creating new opportunities, but also widening the gap between the rich and poor.
And the progressive era was gaining momentum, with all those reformers fighting for social justice and political change.
Right. So it's very likely that Joe and Ruby's lives were touched by these larger forces. Maybe Joe went to Middletown for a factory job.
Yeah. Or maybe Ruby was involved in some local social reform movement, like advocating for better working conditions or women's suffrage.
It's fascinating to think about how these individuals, caught up in their own personal story, were also part of this much bigger historical narrative.
Yeah, like their love story or friendship or whatever it was is playing out against this backdrop of a world in transition.
It adds so much depth to their story. It reminds us that even the most personal experiences are shaped by the forces of history.
And that history is made up of countless individual stories, each one interwoven with the others.
Exactly. So we've looked at the street scene, the social dynamics, the historical context. What other layers can we peel back to really understand this postcard and the story it holds?
I'm curious about the postcard itself, the image that Joe chose to send to Ruby. What can we learn from that choice?
Now, that's a great question. Let's take a closer look at that image and see what secrets it reveals.
So we've been looking at the message, the street scene, the historical context, but we haven't really talked about the front of the postcard itself.
It's funny. It's easy to get caught up in the story and forget about the image.
I know, right?
But the choice of image is important. It's not random.
Right.
It's not random.
Right. It adds another layer to their communication.
Exactly.
Okay, so for our listeners who haven't seen this postcard, can you describe the image for us?
Sure. So it's a view of Lockhart Street looking down the road, but the focus isn't on the people or anything scenic.
Right.
It's really on the businesses. You see the trolley tracks running down the center, and there are people walking on the sidewalks, but they're kind of blurry, almost like they're not the main subject.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a postcard of a landmark or something like that. It's
Right.
just an ordinary street. But it obviously meant something to Joe.
Well-
And, it makes me wonder if the image itself held any special meaning for them. Maybe they had a favorite shop on Lockhart Street or a memory tied to that particular spot.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, postcards, they weren't just chosen for their looks,
Right.
They could be reminders of shared experiences, inside jokes, even subtle messages.
Speaking of subtle messages, let's go back to that last line in Joe's message. Hope to see you well and looking your prettiest.
Yeah.
We've talked about whether it's flirty or just affectionate, but what else can we read into that phrase?
Well, it definitely suggests that appearances mattered back then, especially for women.
Right.
It was something Joe was thinking about. He was looking forward to seeing Ruby at her best.
And it reminds us of the social expectations of the time, doesn't it? Women were often judged on their beauty, their clothes, how they presented themselves.
Absolutely. And, it's amazing how even a simple phrase like looking your prettiest can reveal so much about the values of a different era.
It's true. So this postcard, it's not just a love letter or a friendship note or a family update. It's a window into a whole way of life.
It's a time capsule.
Yeah. It captures a moment in time, but it also reflects these broader social norms and cultural values.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even the most ordinary objects can hold incredible stories.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to how powerful love stories are. Even when we just get these little glimpses of them, like with this postcard.
I know. Why do you think that is? What is it about love stories that captivates us so much?
I think it's because love is a universal language.
Right.
It transcends time and culture. We can all relate to those feelings of longing, attraction, connection.
Right. Even if those feelings were expressed differently back then.
Exactly. And there's also something inherently hopeful about love stories, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they remind us that even in a world full of challenges, there's still room for beauty and connection and happiness.
That's so true. And even if we never know what happened to Joe and Ruby, the possibility of their romance or their friendship.
Right.
It's enough to spark our imaginations.
Absolutely. It leaves us with that sense of wonder.
Right.
And that's what makes history so fascinating. It's not just dates and facts. It's about these real people and their lives and their stories.
Exactly.
So to everyone listening out there, the next time you come across an old object, a photograph, a letter, a postcard, take a moment to really look at it. What stories does it hold? What secrets might it reveal?
You never know what you might discover.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the possibilities. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of 1906, a postcard love story and the enduring power of human connection.
Until next time.